Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriot's History of the United States. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author with Mike Allen of Patriot's History of the United States. We are in Chapter 11, Lighting Out for the Territories. Specifically, we've been talking about Indians. And today we're going to take a break from reading Patriot's History to go back to the reader. And I will be reading from the document in Patriot's History Reader, which is chapter 25, quote, Present Aspects of the Indian Problem by Carl Schurz, 1881. Now, before I do that, we're coming up on an election. I don't know when you're watching this, but today it's October 26th. We're coming up on an election. I will be doing live election night coverage at Decision USA Online. Decision USA Online. Say it one more time. Decision USA Online. We'll be doing that for 6 hours election night. I will be with Seth Keschel, my statistician, the data thrasher, as I call him. And we did this in 2020, had over 800,000 viewers on no preparation with no money. This time we got money. Had some preparation. We have a really nice studio. And we made no bad calls in 2020. People were dropping out of Fox and CNN to watch us. So check us out at decisionusaonline.com. And if the spirit moves, you kick in a few shekels. It's not cheap. We have to get Decision Desk results, real-time streaming results on everything from congressional races, of course, to the presidency. So help us out, decisionusaonline.com. All right. Senator Carl Schurz was Secretary of the Interior under President Rutherford B. Hayes and was known for his enlightened treatment of the American Indians. He addressed many problems through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but ultimately came to feel that Indians faced a simple choice: extinction or civilization. In a very large sense, this was a new dilemma for a conquering nation. Prior to the late 19th century, conquering peoples simply amalgamated or exterminated subject tribes or peoples who failed to maintain their independence through some system of dependence and tribute. In the United States, tribute flowed to the conquered people as reparations for their losses, political concept entirely new in the history of man. Mexico, for example, was paid for the territory it lost in a war with the United States. Let me just comment on that. That's insane. Nobody has ever won a war and said, oh, we're sorry, here's some money because we won. Most times you shouldn't have started in the first place. Carthage, we're going to salt the ground so nothing ever grows here again. But that's not the U.S. Schurz wished eventually to eliminate the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not only by educating and civilizing the Indians, but by placing them on land fully titled for each family and eliminating the remaining unassigned reservation land through sale. In any event, the nomadic hunter-gatherer way of life would end, and as Indians adopted the white man's way, as it was called, they could achieve American citizenship. One reformer, Merrill Gates, proudly announced the intention was to get the Indian, quote, out of the blanket and into trousers, unquote. The present-day map, however, shows extensive Indian reservations, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs is alive and well, doling out millions of dollars to Indians for their maintenance and managing over 55 million acres of land. Indians have remained in a dependent state for well over 100 years, and critics allege that the government handouts created a permanent state of welfare dependency. I live 100 yards from an Indian reservation, and for the most part, it's squalor. There's a few nice houses. They all get the same house from the tribe. I gather you're not allowed to build a different house out there. But some are really well cared for, really well kept, and others are just a mess. And I've counted up to 18 cars at a single house at one time. Anyway, so let's get started here. Hold on, this is giving me a problem. There. Okay. Present Aspects of the Indian Problem by Carl Schurz. One of those days. That the history of our Indian relations presents, in great part, a record of broken treaties, of unjust wars, and of cruel spoliation, is a fact too well known to require proof or to suffer denial. But it is only just to the government of the United States to say that its treaties with Indian tribes were, as a rule, made in good faith, and that most of our Indian wars were brought on by circumstances for which the government itself could not fairly be held responsible. I think that's certainly true for a lot of the Plains Indians wars, because the fact was, without written titles and deeds, treaties were useless because there was no way to maintain a claim. Anyway, of the treaties, those were the most important by which the government guaranteed Indian tribes certain tracts of land as reservations to be held and occupied by them forever under the protection of the United States in the place of other lands ceded by the Indians. There is no reason to doubt that most, if not all, such cases, those who conducted Indian affairs on the part of the government, not anticipating the rapid advance of settlement, sincerely believed in the possibility of maintaining those reservations intact for the Indians. And that, in this respect, while their intentions were honest, their foresight was at fault. There are men still living who spent their younger days near the border of, quote, Indian territory in Ohio and Indiana. And it is a well-known fact that when the Indian territory was established west of the Mississippi, it was generally thought that the settlements of white men would never crowd into that region, at least not for many generations. Thus were such reservations guaranteed by the government with the honest belief that the Indians would be secure in their possession, which, as subsequent events prove, was a gross error in judgment. It is also a fact that most of the Indian wars grew not from any desire of the government to disturb the Indians and the territorial possessions guaranteed to them, but from restless and unscrupulous greed of frontiersmen who pushed their settlements and ventures onto Indian country, provoked conflicts with the Indians, and then called for protection of the government against the resisting and retaliating Indians, thus invoking it in the hostilities which they themselves had begun. It's true that some instances of Indian wars are precipitated by acts of rashness and violence on the part of the military men without orders from the government, while the popular impression that Indian outbreaks were generally caused by the villainy of government agents who defrauded and starved the Indians is substantially unfounded. Well, I don't know about that. We have plenty of records of government agents who were engaged in graft and stealing from the Indians. Such frauds and robberies have no doubt been frequently committed. It has also happened that Indian tribes are exposed to great suffering and actual starvation in consequence of the neglect of Congress to provide the funds necessary to fulfill treaty stipulations. But things of this kind resulted, but seldom, in actual hostilities. To such wrongs, the Indians usually submitted with a more enduring patience than they received credit for, although in some instances, it must be admitted, outrages were committed by Indians without provocation, which resulted in trouble on a large scale. In mentioning these facts, it is not my purpose to hold the government entirely guiltless of the wrongs inflicted upon the Indians. It has undoubtedly sometimes lacked in vigor when Indian tribes needed protection. It has in many cases yielded too readily to the pressure of those who wanted to possess themselves of Indian lands. Still less, I would justify some high-handed proceedings on the part of the government in moving peaceable Indian tribes from place to place without their consent, trying to rectify old blunders by new acts of injustice. But I desire to point out that by far the larger part of our Indian troubles has sprung from the greedy encroachments of white men upon Indian lands, and that hostilities being brought about in this manner in which Indians uniformly succumbed. Old treaties and arrangements were overthrown to be supplanted by new ones of a similar character, which eventually led to the same results. I would add here that almost exclusively Indians were moved from better land to worse land, and that was a big problem. If it had been different, if they had been moved from worse land to better land, you might have more of a case for the reservation system. Let's see. In light of events, the policy of assigning to the Indian tribes large tracts of land as permanent reservations within the limits of which they might continue to roam at pleasure with the expectation that they would never be disturbed thereon appears as a grand mistake, a natural, perhaps even an unavoidable mistake in times gone by, but a mistake for all that, for the policy failed to take into account the inevitable pressure of rapidly and irresistibly advancing settlement and enterprise. While duly admitting and confessing the injustice done, we must understand the real nature of the difficulty if we mean to solve it. No intelligent man will today for a moment entertain the belief that there is still a nook or corner of the country that has the least agricultural or mineral value in it beyond the reach of progressive civilization. The settler and the miner are beginning or at least threatening to invade every Indian reservation that offers any attraction, and it is a well-known fact that the frontiersmen almost always look upon the Indian lands as the most valuable in the neighborhood, simply because the Indian occupies them and the white man is excluded from them. The fact that wild Indians, and here it is proper to say that when in this discussion Indians are spoken of as wild and their habits of life as savage, these terms are not used in the extreme sense, but as simply meaning uncivilized. There being, of course, among them in that respect a difference of degrees, hold immense tracts of country which, possessed by them, are of no advantage to anybody, while it is said thousands upon thousands of white people stand ready to cultivate them and to make them contribute to the national wealth, is always apt to make an impression upon minds not accustomed to nice discrimination. What is to become of the Indians, he asks. In trying to solve this question, we have to keep in mind a few facts here recited. However, we may deplore the injustice which these facts have brought and are still bringing upon the red men, yet with these facts we have to deal. It is true that the Indian reservations now existing cover a great many millions of acres containing very valuable tracts of agricultural, grazing, and mineral land, that the area now cultivated or that can be possibly cultivated by the Indians is comparatively very small, that by the larger portion in lying waste. Is it not, in view of the history of more than 2 centuries, useless to speculate in our minds how these many millions of acres can be preserved in their present state for the Indians to roam upon, how the greedy push of settlement and enterprise might be permanently checked for the protection of red men's present possessions as hunting grounds upon which, moreover, there is now but very little left to hunt? It will be easy for the rough and reckless frontiersmen to pick quarrels of the Indians. Speculators who have their eyes upon every opportunity for gain will urge them on. The watchfulness of the government will, in the long run, be unavailing to prevent collisions. The conflict once brought on, the white man and the red will stand against one another, and in spite of all good intentions and the sense of justice, the forces of the government will find themselves engaged on the side of the white man. The Indians will be hunted down at whatever cost. It will simply be a repetition of the old story, and that old story will be eventually repeated whenever there is a large and valuable Indian reservation surrounded by white settlements. Unjust, disgraceful as this may be, it is not only probable, but almost inevitable. What does, under such circumstances, wise and humane statesmanship demand? Not that we would close our eyes to existing facts, but that keeping those facts clearly in view, we should discover upon the possibilities that there is most just and best for the Indians. I am profoundly convinced that a stubborn maintenance of the system of large Indian reservations must eventually result in the destruction of the red men, however faithfully the government may endeavor to protect their rights. What we can and should do is, in general terms, to fit the Indians as much as possible for the habits and occupations of civilized life by work and education, to individualize them in the possession and appreciation of property, by allotting to them lands in severalty, giving them a fee simple title individually to the parcels of land they cultivate, inalienable for a certain period, and to obtain their consent to a disposition of that part of the lands which they cannot use for a fair compensation. In such a manner, they are no longer stand in the way of development of the country as an obstacle, but form that part of it and are benefited by it. In other words, we need to break up the Indian reservations, and we need to divide it up individually with clear title to land. And if the Indians show that they can't farm or develop a certain amount of land, then it should be sold off, but they don't say exactly, Schurz doesn't say what those percentages are or who makes that determination. The circumstances surrounding them, the Indians, place before the Indians this stern alternative: extermination or civilization. This goes back to our discussion of Bob Trennert's book, Alternative to Extinction, that the reservation system was the only alternative to extinction. And here Schurz is saying, no, the reservation system will ensure their extinction. Obviously, he's been wrong. The thought of exterminating race, once the only occupation of the soil upon which so many millions of our own people have grown prosperous and happy, must be revolting to every American who is not devoid of all sentiments of justice and humanity. To civilize them, which was once only a benevolent fancy, has now become an absolute necessity if we are to save them. Can the Indians be civilized, he asks. This question is answered in the negative only by those who do not want to civilize them. My experience in the management of Indian affairs, which enable me to witness progress made even among the wildest tribes, confirms me in the belief that not only is it possible to introduce civilized habits and occupations among Indians, if only the proper means are employed, that care and guidance is necessary. The task of the government, which, as to the Indians at least, must exercise paternal functions until they are sufficiently advanced to take care of themselves. In this respect, some sincere philanthropists seem inclined to run into a serious error in insisting that, first of all things, it is necessary to give to the Indian the rights and privileges of American citizenship, to treat him in all respects as a citizen, to relieve him of all restraints to which other American citizens are not subject. I do not intend to go here into a disquisition on the legal status of the Indian, on which elaborate treatises have been written and learned judgmental decisions rendered, without raising it above dispute. The end to be reached is unquestionably the gradual absorption of the Indian into this great body of American citizenship. When that is accomplished, then, and only then, the legal status of the Indian will be clearly and finally fixed. But full citizenship must be regarded as the terminal, not the initial point of development. The first necessity, therefore, is not at once to give it to them, but to fit them for it. In other words, you can't make them citizens until they have certain prerequisites. And to this end, nothing is more indispensable than the protecting and guiding care of the government during the dangerous period of transition from savage to civilized life. To fit the Indians for their ultimate absorption in the great body of American citizenship, three things are suggested by common sense as well as by philanthropy. One, that they be taught to work by making work profitable and attractive to them. Two, that they be educated, especially the youth of both sexes. And three, that they be individualized in the possession of property by settlement in severalty with fee simple title, after which the lands they do not use may be disposed of for general settlement and enterprise without danger and with profit to the Indians. This may seem a large program, strange in contrast to the old wild life of the Indians, but they are now more disposed than ever to accept it. Even those of them who have so far been in great measure living upon the chase are becoming aware that the game is fast disappearing and will no longer be sufficient to furnish them a sustenance. In a few years, the buffalo will be exterminated and smaller game in gradually growing scarce, except in the most inaccessible mountain regions. The necessity of procuring food in some other way is thus before their eyes. Okay, this is a really long passage by Schurz. So we're going to stop here, and I will pick up here at the top of page 200 to this end on the next segment of our show. So I will see you guys back here soon for Patriot's History. Remember, if you have the most recent edition, the 15th anniversary edition, and you want the update from 2018 to 2023, which I call the 20th anniversary edition, it's really a PDF of a chapter and of numerous insertions you would make yourself as you read through it. I'll be happy to send that to you free if you email me at Larry at wildworldofhistory.com. That's Larry at wildworldofhistory.com. If you're into politics, check out my Substack at Larry Swikart. I post 2 or 3 times a week various opinion pieces. And if you want video commentary, check out The Insider at the Wild World of Politics, where I do political commentary Monday, Wednesday, Friday after today's news. And finally, I do today's news usually 2 to 3 times a week at the Wild World of Politics. I cover 25 to 40 of the top news issues of the day. So check it out. I will see you guys back here next time.